I never imagined I'd have to install security cameras to protect myself from my own family. But when I came home from a weekend trip, my bedroom looked different. Nothing was missing. Yet something felt terribly wrong. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had left the closet door open. Maybe I'd forgotten to close the nightstand drawer before leaving. Maybe I was just exhausted after the long drive home. Then I noticed my jewelry box. It had been moved just a few inches. Most people would never have noticed. But this was my house. I lived alone, and I knew exactly where I left everything. Someone had been inside. My stomach tightened as I remembered the security cameras I'd installed a month earlier after a series of break-ins had been reported in my neighborhood. I opened the camera app, expecting to see a stranger. Instead, I saw my father unlocking my front door with the spare key I'd given him for emergencies. A few seconds later, my younger sister walked in behind him. Then they began opening drawers, searching my bedroom, looking through my office, and even checking inside boxes in the attic. They weren't visiting. They were hunting for something. What they didn't know was that every second of their visit had been recorded. And what I discovered that night didn't just destroy my trust in them. It uncovered a family secret that had been buried for more than 20 years. My name is Natalie Harper. I'm 32 years old, and this is how my own father and sister betrayed me. For as long as I can remember, I was the responsible one in the family. While my younger sister, Grace, was out enjoying parties and weekend trips with friends, I was working extra shifts, paying off student loans, and trying to build a future for myself. I never complained. After graduating from nursing school, I spent nearly 10 years working 12-hour shifts at the local hospital. Holidays, weekends, overnight rotations. I accepted every opportunity to earn a little more money. Every paycheck brought me one step closer to a dream I'd had since I was a little girl, owning my own home. When I finally signed the papers 6 months earlier, I cried in the parking lot, not because the house was perfect. It wasn't. It was a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood with aging hardwood floors, a tiny backyard, and a kitchen that desperately needed updating. But it was mine. Every wall represented years of sacrifice. Every room reminded me that hard work really could change someone's life. My father, David Harper, didn't see it that way. "This place is smaller than I expected," he said during his first visit. I laughed awkwardly, hoping he was joking. He wasn't. "You should have waited another year and bought something bigger," he continued, looking around my living room with obvious disappointment. "You don't want people thinking this is the best you could do." I forced a smile. "Of it, Dad," he shrugged, "if you're happy." That was typical of him. Nothing I accomplished ever seemed good enough. Straight A's in school. You could have worked harder. Graduating nursing school. There are doctors in the family next door. Buying my own home without anyone's financial help. You settled. After years of hearing comments like that, I stopped trying to earn his approval. Grace, on the other hand, always seemed to have it. She was 5 years younger than me and somehow managed to charm everyone she met. She could make a mistake, and Dad would laugh it off. If I made the same mistake, I'd hear about it for months. As adults, Grace and I remained polite, but we were never close. She often teased me for living such a quiet life. "Basically retired at 32. She'd joke whenever I turned down invitations to go out. I'd simply smile. I liked my peaceful life. I had my career, my home, a small circle of loyal friends, and enough independence to make my own decisions. That was enough for me. 2 weeks before everything happened, one of my neighbors mentioned that several homes nearby had been broken into while the owners were away. Nothing violent. Just burglars looking for cash, jewelry, and electronics. The conversation stayed with me. So I bought a simple home security system with motion sensors and cameras covering the front door, back door, driveway, hallway, and living room. It wasn't because I was afraid. It just seemed like a smart precaution. Little did I know those cameras would end up protecting me from people I had trusted my entire life. The weekend, everything changed. One of my closest friends invited me to her wedding 2 hours away. I almost didn't go because of work. But after switching shifts with a coworker, I finally agreed. Friday afternoon, I packed a small suitcase, watered my plants, double-checked every window and door, and activated the security system before leaving. Just before pulling out of the driveway, my phone rang. It was my father. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yeah, I'll be back Sunday evening." "Have fun." It was a surprisingly short conversation. Nothing about his voice seemed unusual. Nothing warned me that before the weekend was over, he would be standing inside my house without my knowledge. The wedding was beautiful. For the first time in months, I relaxed, I laughed, I danced. I forgot about work. When Sunday evening finally arrived, I drove home feeling refreshed. As I unlocked the front door, everything looked exactly the way I'd left it, or so I thought. After setting my suitcase down, I walked into my bedroom. Something immediately felt off. The closet door was slightly open. I always closed it. One drawer of my nightstand wasn't fully shut. A decorative box on my dresser had been moved. Nothing appeared to be missing. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. No valuables gone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside my home. I stood perfectly still in the middle of my bedroom. Then a chill ran down my spine. Without saying a word, I reached for my phone and opened the security camera app. For a few seconds, I just stared at my phone. Part of me hoped I was overreacting. Maybe the cameras hadn't recorded anything. Maybe I had simply forgotten how I'd left the room before my trip. I opened the security app and selected the timeline for Saturday afternoon. The loading circle spun for a moment before the first clip appeared. At exactly 1:17 p.m., a familiar silver SUV pulled into my driveway. I frowned. That was my father's vehicle. "What is he doing here?" I whispered. A few seconds later, the driver's door opened. David Harper stepped out, wearing jeans and the navy windbreaker he always wore on weekends. Then another door opened. Grace climbed out, carrying a large leather handbag. They weren't laughing or chatting the way they usually did. Instead, they looked around as if making sure none of the neighbors were watching. My pulse quickened. Dad walked straight to my front porch. Without hesitation, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a key, the spare key. The one I had given him months earlier, not because I expected him to let himself into my house whenever he wanted. I had given it to him for emergencies, if I ever got locked out, if I was in the hospital, if there was a burst pipe or a fire, not so he could enter while I was hundreds of miles away. The front door opened. The two of them walked inside. I switched to the camera in my hallway. For the first minute, nothing seemed unusual. Dad looked around the living room while Grace wandered toward the kitchen. Then Dad pointed toward the hallway. Grace nodded, and they split up. A knot formed in my stomach. I selected the bedroom camera. The moment the video started, I felt sick. Grace walked directly into my bedroom as if she'd been there 100 times before. She didn't stop to admire the room. She didn't sit on the bed. She went straight to my dresser. One by one, she opened every drawer. She picked up my jewelry. She looked underneath the jewelry box. She flipped through old birthday cards. Then she moved to my closet. She searched every shelf, every storage bin, every coat pocket. My father entered a minute later. Without saying a word, he opened my filing cabinet. He pulled out folders containing my tax documents, bank statements, insurance papers, and mortgage records. He carefully examined each one before placing them back, not in the same order. That explained why everything had looked different when I came home. I watched in disbelief. "What are you looking for?" I whispered at the screen. Then things became even stranger. Dad leaned toward Grace and said something too quietly for the camera microphone to catch. Grace's eyes widened. She nodded quickly. Together they walked toward my home office. I switched cameras again. The office footage made my blood run cold. Dad searched every drawer in my desk. Grace opened every cabinet. She even removed books from the bookshelf and flipped through their pages. Who hides things inside books? Apparently they believed I did. They weren't randomly snooping. They were searching with purpose, almost like they expected to find something very specific. After nearly 20 minutes in the office, they headed upstairs to the attic. I had installed a camera there only because it overlooked the hallway leading to the storage area. I had never imagined it would become the most important camera in the house. The footage showed Grace dragging down old storage boxes labeled, childhood photos, grandma's keepsakes, family records. My heart skipped a beat. Those boxes hadn't been touched in years. They belonged to my late grandmother. After she passed away 3 years earlier, I'd packed everything carefully and stored it in the attic because I couldn't bear to throw any of it away. Grace opened the first box. She shuffled through old photographs. Dad grabbed a stack of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. He untied them and began reading. His expression changed instantly. He looked nervous, very nervous. He whispered something to Grace. She glanced toward the attic stairs as though afraid someone might suddenly walk in. Dad quickly stuffed the letters back into the box. Then they searched even faster, almost desperately. For another 15 minutes, they opened every container in the attic, old school projects, Christmas decorations, family albums, baby clothes. Nothing escaped their attention. Finally, Dad checked his watch. He said something to Grace. She looked disappointed. Before leaving, she carefully closed each box and tried to return everything to its original place. They wanted me to think no one had been there. They nearly succeeded. If I hadn't noticed that tiny movement of my jewelry box, I never would have checked the cameras. The footage ended with both of them walking out the front door. Dad locked it behind him. Then they drove away. I sat frozen on my couch. Nearly an hour had passed since I'd started watching the recordings. My hands were trembling. My own father, my own sister. They had searched my entire home while I was away. Not because they wanted money. Not because they wanted jewelry. They had been looking for something hidden among my grandmother's belongings. But what? And why had my father looked so frightened when he found those old letters? At that moment, I realized I couldn't ignore what had happened. The answers were somewhere inside those boxes in my attic. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in almost 4 years. Then I climbed into the attic, determined to discover what my father had been so desperate to find before I did. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father opening my drawers and Grace digging through my grandmother's keepsakes as if they were looking for buried treasure. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. I called my supervisor at the hospital and asked for the day off. "You never call in sick," she said with concern. "Just need to take care of a family matter." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. If she only knew. After ending the call, I made myself a cup of coffee that went completely untouched. My eyes stayed fixed on the pull-down attic ladder, whatever my father had been searching for. It had something to do with Grandma. I climbed into the attic carrying a flashlight, a notebook, and my phone. The storage boxes were exactly where they had been on the camera footage. At least they looked that way. But as soon as I picked up the first box, I noticed something odd. The lid had been placed on backward. It was a tiny detail that most people would never notice. But I had packed these boxes myself. I remembered exactly how they were arranged. I opened the box labeled Grandma's Keepsakes. Inside were old recipe books, a sewing kit, greeting cards, and dozens of family photographs. Everything looked ordinary, until I reached the bottom. There, tucked beneath an old quilt, was a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The same letters my father had read on the security footage. I carefully untied the ribbon. The envelopes were old. Some were yellowed with age. Others had fragile edges that looked ready to crumble if handled too roughly. Most of them were addressed to my grandmother. The return address belonged to a law office I'd never heard of. Curious, I unfolded the first letter. It wasn't personal. It was legal. The letter discussed property taxes, land surveys, and ownership documents dating back more than 20 years. I frowned. My grandmother had never owned expensive property. At least, that's what I'd always been told. I continued reading. Another letter mentioned a parcel of land that had increased significantly in value because of nearby commercial development. A third letter referred to negotiations with several companies interested in purchasing the property. The amounts mentioned were astonishing. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. My heart raced. "What is this?" I whispered to myself. I kept reading. Then I found a handwritten note tucked inside one envelope. It was unmistakably my grandmother's handwriting. The note read, "If anything happens to me before I can settle this matter, everything concerning the Willow Creek property belongs to Natalie. She's the only one who kept her promise to me." I read the sentence again, then again. My name, not Grace's, not my father's, mine. I could hardly breathe. Willow Creek, I'd never heard of it. What promise was Grandma talking about? Suddenly, a memory came rushing back. I was 10 years old, spending a summer with Grandma at her small farmhouse. Every evening we'd walk through a beautiful stretch of countryside she simply called our land. She loved those fields more than anything. She planted young oak trees there with her own hands. One afternoon, she'd smiled at me and said, "Promise me you'll always protect this place, Natalie. Land carries memories. Once it's gone, those memories disappear forever." At the time, I'd laughed and promised without understanding what she meant. Had she remembered that conversation all these years? Was that the promise she'd written about? I wiped away unexpected tears. Grandma had always believed in me. She was the only person who never compared me to Grace. The only one who celebrated every achievement, no matter how small. As I continued searching the box, I discovered a large sealed envelope. Across the front, written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, were 7 words. "For Natalie. Open only if necessary." My hands began to shake. The envelope had never been opened, not even by my father. He must not have found it. Carefully, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first sentence made my blood run cold. If you are reading this, it means your father finally went looking for what I refused to give him. I stared at the page. My father. Grandma had expected this. She had known. The letter continued. David has spent years trying to convince me to transfer the Willow Creek property into his name. I refused every single time because he wanted to sell it. He never understood that some things are worth more than money. I felt my stomach tighten. I have watched how differently he treats you and Grace. I prayed he would change, but he never did. That is why I made arrangements to leave the property to you. I trust your heart more than I trust his ambitions. Tears blurred my vision. All my life, I had wondered why my father never seemed proud of me. Now I realized Grandma had seen it too. She had protected me in the only way she could. Near the end of the letter, she wrote something that explained everything. Your father doesn't know where the final ownership documents are. Only my attorney knows. If David ever searches for them, do not confront him until you've spoken with the lawyer first. Attached to the letter was a business card. Sarah Whitmore, attorney at law. On the back, Grandma had written, "She knows the whole truth." I slowly lowered the letter. Everything suddenly made sense. My father and Grace hadn't searched my house because they wanted to steal jewelry. They were looking for the documents that proved ownership of the property. And judging by the panic on my father's face in the security footage, he was terrified that I would find them first. I looked at the business card again. For a long moment, I just sat there in the silent attic. Then I picked up my phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number on the card. The woman answered after the second ring. "Whitmore Law Office. This is Sarah speaking." I swallowed hard. "My name is Natalie Harper." There was a long silence. Then, in a calm voice, she said something that made my heart stop. "Been wondering when you would finally call." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I tightened my grip on the phone. "You've been expecting my call?" I finally asked. "Yes," the woman replied gently. "Your grandmother asked me to wait until you contacted me. I couldn't reach out to you first without violating attorney-client confidentiality." I glanced down at the letter still resting in my lap. "So, you knew about me." "I've known about you for years, Natalie." A chill ran through me. "Can we meet today?" I asked. "I think that's for the best." 2 hours later, I parked outside a quiet brick office building on the edge of downtown. My stomach was tied in knots as I walked inside. Sarah Whitmore greeted me with a warm smile. She looked to be in her early 60s, with silver hair neatly pinned back and kind eyes that reminded me a little of my grandmother. "Your grandmother talked about you often," she said as she shook my hand. "She did. She was very proud of you." Simple words almost brought me to tears. They were words I'd spent my entire life wishing I could hear from my father. Sarah led me into her office and placed a thick file on the conference table. "This," she said, gently touching the folder, "is why your father searched your house." She opened the file. Inside were property maps, legal documents, survey reports, tax records, and copies of correspondence dating back more than 20 years. "Willow Creek property consists of nearly 80 acres, Sarah explained. I blinked. "Acres," she nodded. "When your grandfather passed away, the land became your grandmother's sole property." Years later, developers became interested because a new highway was planned nearby. She slid another document toward me. The estimated value made my heart race. The property was now worth several $1,000,000. I looked at Sarah in disbelief. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't." I sat back in my chair, unable to process what I was hearing. My grandmother, the quiet woman who baked pies, planted flowers, and mended old quilts, had owned land worth millions. "So why didn't she sell it?" I asked. Sarah smiled softly. "Because she believed it represented your family's history. She told me that once the land was sold, it would never belong to the family again." I nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like Grandma. Then Sarah's expression became more serious. "Your father disagreed." I wasn't surprised. He wanted the money for years. Sarah opened another folder. "I documented every meeting because your grandmother requested it." She handed me several signed statements. According to the records, my father had repeatedly pressured Grandma to transfer ownership to him. Sometimes he asked politely, other times he threatened to stop visiting her altogether. My chest tightened. "He actually did that?" Sarah nodded. "Your grandmother was heartbroken." I lowered my eyes. The woman who had always smiled whenever I visited had been carrying this burden alone. "Eventually," Sarah continued, "she changed her will." I looked up. "She removed your father as the primary beneficiary of the property." My heart pounded. "And named me instead." Room fell silent. Sarah folded her hands. She told me she trusted you because you never asked her for anything. I thought back to all those afternoons we spent together. We never talked about money. We planted flowers, fed birds, walked across the fields, shared homemade lemonade on the porch. Those moments had mattered to her far more than I ever realized. There is one more thing you need to know, Sarah said carefully. She reached into the folder and removed a small flash drive. This was delivered to my office 1 week before your grandmother passed away. I stared at it. What's on it? A recorded message. Me, only for you. Sarah plugged the drive into her computer. A video filled the screen. My grandmother appeared. She looked older and frailer than I remembered, but her smile was unmistakable. Hello, my sweet Natalie. Tears instantly filled my eyes. If you're watching this, then I'm no longer with you. I pressed a hand over my mouth. I wish I could have had one more cup of tea with you. She smiled sadly. But life doesn't always give us that choice. She paused for a moment. Need you to know something. Expression became serious. I loved both of my grandchildren. I prayed every day that your father would stop comparing you and Grace. Never understood how deeply those comparisons hurt you. I couldn't stop crying. I saw every sacrifice you made. I saw you work while your friends were enjoying life. I saw you study late into the night. I saw you become the kind, honest woman I always hoped you would be. No one had ever said those words to me before. Then Grandma looked directly into the camera. If David ever comes looking for this property, don't let guilt make your decision. May tell you that family comes first. Remember this, Natalie. Family should never have to manipulate you to prove they love you. Room was completely silent except for my quiet sobs. Grandma took a slow breath before speaking again. Have already forgiven David. Forgiveness doesn't mean surrendering what is right. Her final words were the ones that stayed with me. You have a good heart. Don't let anyone use it against you. Screen faded to black. Neither Sarah nor I spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Sarah handed me a tissue. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. I nodded. She really was. Sarah closed the laptop. There is just one final issue. I looked at her. Your father doesn't know the property officially belongs to you yet. I frowned. What do you believes the final transfer documents are still missing? They're not, Sarah smiled. No, she opened a locked drawer in her desk. Inside was a thick envelope with my name written across the front. She placed it in front of me. Original ownership documents have been safely stored here ever since your grandmother signed them. I stared at the envelope, everything my father had searched my house for, everything he'd risked his relationship with me to find. Had never been in my house at all. Sarah looked at me carefully. Now you have a choice. You can pretend none of this happened. You can confront your father. Or, she paused, you can wait. I frowned. Wait for what? Sarah folded her hands. People who believe they've gotten away with something almost always try again. I thought about the security footage, about my father's desperate expression. About Grace helping him search every room in my house. A slow realization settled over me. They still believed the documents were hidden somewhere, which meant, sooner or later, they would come back. And this time, I'd be waiting for them. I didn't tell my father I knew. I didn't call Grace. I didn't post anything on social media. Instead, I went home and acted as though nothing had happened. For the next week, I went to work, visited the grocery store, and answered my father's occasional text messages with short, polite replies. How's work? Busy. Everything okay? Fine. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. But I knew he was waiting to see whether I discovered that someone had been inside my house. Meanwhile, I was making my own preparations. The first thing I did was change every lock on my house. The locksmith finished the job in less than an hour. Then I changed the passwords on my security cameras, my garage door opener, and every smart device connected to my home. Finally, I called Sarah. I'd like to make sure everything is legally protected. You already own the property, she assured me. I know, I replied. But after what I've seen, I don't want to leave anything to chance. She agreed. Over the next few days, every document was secured, copied, and safely stored. No one, not even my father, could touch the property without my permission. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Then 8 days later, my phone rang. It was Grace. She said cheerfully, Dad and I were thinking about stopping by tomorrow. My heart skipped a beat. Really? Yeah, we haven't seen your new house in a while. That was a lie. They'd seen every room just over a week earlier. I smiled to myself. Of course, I said. Come by around 2. The next afternoon, I cleaned the house as if I were expecting honored guests. I made coffee, set out cookies, and quietly checked that every security camera was recording. At exactly 2 o'clock, a familiar silver SUV pulled into my driveway. David and Grace stepped out wearing warm smiles, the same smiles they'd worn my entire life. "Sweetheart," Dad said as he hugged me, "you look tired." "Long week," I replied. Grace handed me a small bouquet of flowers. "We thought we'd surprise you." Thoughtful. We sat in the living room making small talk. Dad asked about work. Grace talked about a vacation she wanted to take. Anyone watching us would have believed we were a perfectly happy family. Then Dad casually asked the question I'd been expecting. "So," he took a sip of coffee, "everything okay around here?" "Yes." "No break-ins or anything?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "No," he nodded almost too quickly. "Good." A few minutes later, Grace stood up. "Just going to use the restroom." Ahead, instead of walking toward the guest bathroom, she turned toward the hallway leading to my bedroom, exactly where the security cameras couldn't miss her. I let her go. A minute later, Dad cleared his throat. "Check on her." "Of course." He disappeared down the same hallway. I counted silently: 1, 2, 3. Then I stood up. When I reached my bedroom doorway, both of them froze. Grace had one of my dresser drawers halfway open. Dad was standing beside my filing cabinet. No one said a word. Finally, I broke the silence. "Still looking for something?" Grace slammed the drawer shut. "We weren't." I raised my hand. "Please." More lies. Dad's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, tapped the security app, and pressed play. The hallway filled with the sound of the previous week's recording. There they were. Walking through my front door, searching my bedroom, opening my desk, going through my grandmother's keepsakes. Grace's face lost all color. Dad stared at the floor. I stopped the video. I noticed everything. Silence, then my father sighed. "I can explain." "Please do." He looked at Grace before speaking. "We were looking for your grandmother's property documents." "I know." His head snapped up. "You know." "I know everything." The first time in my life, my father looked genuinely afraid. "I met with Sarah Whitmore." His shoulders dropped. "So she told you." "Told me how you spent years trying to pressure Grandma into giving you the land." He didn't deny it. "She showed me your letters." Still no denial. "I watched Grandma's video." At those words, tears filled his eyes. "I never wanted this to happen," he whispered. I looked at him in disbelief. "You searched my house while I was away. You violated my trust. You lied to my face. You're saying you never wanted this." He sat down heavily in a chair. "I made mistakes." Grace quietly began crying. "Sorry, Natalie." I looked at my sister. "Were you sorry while you were opening every drawer in my bedroom?" She lowered her eyes. "No." Dad finally spoke again. "Only wanted to keep the property in the family." I almost laughed. "By secretly putting it in your own name?" He had no answer. The silence lasted several seconds. Then I said the words I'd rehearsed in my mind ever since watching the security footage. "Property is staying in the family." Dad looked up hopefully. "But not under your control." His expression fell. "Have no intention of selling it." I thought of Grandma planting trees, of our summer walks, of the promise I'd made as a little girl. "I'm going to preserve it exactly as she wanted." No one argued. They knew they had lost. I walked to the front door and opened it. "I think it's time for you both to leave." Dad slowly stood. Before walking out, he turned toward me. "I hope someday you can forgive me." I met his eyes. "I might. Trust has to be earned." He nodded quietly. Neither he nor Grace said another word. As they walked to the SUV, I watched them drive away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. A month later, I visited Willow Creek with Sarah. The oak trees Grandma and I had planted years ago were taller now. Their branches swayed gently in the breeze, just as they had when I was a little girl. I stood beneath them and smiled. "I kept my promise, Grandma," I whispered. The wind rustled through the leaves, almost as if she were answering. Some people believe family deserves unlimited chances simply because they're family. I don't. Love without respect isn't love. And forgiveness doesn't require you to hand someone the keys to your life. My father and sister searched my house believing they would find something that belonged to them. Instead, they found the one thing they never expected: the truth. And the truth cost them the trust of the only daughter and sister who had loved them without conditions. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me honestly, what would you have done if your own family searched your house while you were away? I'd love to read your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.